The process of finding our style and nailing down exactly how we want our images to look is a long road, and we make a lot of mistakes on the way to getting to that perfect image edit. My name is Austin James Jackson. I'm a professional landscape photographer based here in Southern Utah. I'm really excited you're joining me today for this video where I'm going to cover 5 of the most common post-processing mistakes that I see landscape photographers make, and then I'm going to show you how to fix each one of those. Now, before we jump in, it's important to note 2 things. First off, this is going to be assuming that you want to create images that look realistic, and second off, this is also assuming that you like the way that I shoot my images and you agree with my take, I guess, and what I think a realistic image looks like. Of course, this is going to look different for everyone. You might disagree with some of the things that I say in this video, but this is just my opinion. So if you're someone who likes my work, you'll probably like these opinions as well, but you are totally welcome to disagree. And I'd love to hear your thoughts if you disagree or agree or whatever like that down below in the comments. Let's go ahead and jump in there into Lightroom Classic and talk about the first mistake, which I'm going to show on this photo. And this is a photo that I've merged together essentially. But what the mistake is white balance. This is something that if you've been watching my channel for long, you know, I think this is like honestly the biggest building block piece, biggest thing that must be successful for the image to be successful is that the white balance needs to be correct right off the rip, right out of the gate. You'll see on the left is how the camera shot the white balance in the field. On the right is adjusted to pretty close to what I want my final image to be. It's really important that you change this because you can see no matter how many edits I apply to this left side image here, I'm just simply not going to get the results I want. I'll show you, this is the final edit of this photo. I edited this a long time ago. It's maybe just slightly too warm, slightly too magenta toned. That's something that, you know, I could come in here. You can already see I've cooled it down a little bit and I've adjusted the tint a little bit, but somewhere in there maybe feels a little bit more honest to me. But let's look at the original image here. This is kind of the raw file with just a few basic adjustments. Now, it's easy for me to tell you, you need to get the white balance right. That's really important. And it's easy for me to look at an image and say the white balance is wrong, but it's hard for me to explain to you exactly how to adjust the white balance, but I'm going to do my best. This is how I teach a lot of my clients on my workshops. So I'm going to adjust the white balance here. One big mistake a lot of photographers make is that they are looking at the colorful part of their image. So for us landscape photographers, we're shooting during the golden hour. A lot of times we're shooting sunsets or sunrises. So they're looking at the sky. And they're saying, I want to make this sky just look really good. And all they're doing is looking at the sky and they're saying, wow, as I slide this up, the sky just looks so much better, you know? I'm getting all these great colors in the sky. Look at that. Look how much better that sky is than this one. Problem is, everything else doesn't look good. So instead of looking at the sky and at the colorful parts in your image, what you actually want to do when you're dialing in the white balance is look at something that either A, should be neutral, or B, look in the shadows. So for me, I'm going to be looking down here at this rock. Now that might seem a little weird to you because you're thinking this rock isn't very important in the frame, but because it should be neutral toned, especially on this side of the rock in the shadows, this should be pretty neutral. That's going to help me to dial in the white balance. Now you can try using the eyedropper, but this usually doesn't work for me. You can see that doesn't really look too great. So I am just going to do this manually here. So first of all, I can tell rock is way too blue. Let's warm this rock up. Maybe like in there. Looks good. You don't want to go too far because you can see when I adjusted the white balance for the sky to look good, I would have been all the way over here and the rock is yellow. In shadows, it shouldn't be yellow. I want it just like that. And then as I zoom in, sometimes I zoom in a lot. This might seem weird to you. I'm just kind of looking at the rock. It might be a little bit magenta toned. And so I can dial that back just a touch to make it feel pretty neutral. I'm just going to slide this a little bit. Now you can see this feels a lot more honest compared to our original image because look at these rocks. They're very, very neutral toned. Everything out here is pretty neutral toned. So this feels pretty honest. Now this is the first step that I take. Obviously there's a lot more edits that I would apply, but generally I'm adjusting that white balance as soon as I would just go in, you know, tweak the highlights and shadows, maybe adjust a few things, and then I'm going to go straight into the white balance to make sure that's set. And if you are editing, non-destructively, you can of course always go back and change this. It's always going to be better to adjust this here on the raw file rather than, if you export this somewhere else and start editing a TIFF, you're not going to get quite the same capabilities that you will as adjusting the temperature and the tint from the raw file like this. So that's number one. You got to really, really focus on the white balance. Now, mistake number two continues to be a bigger and bigger problem as we get cameras with more dynamic range. Some of the best cameras on the market today have about 15 stops of dynamic range. That problem is that people are bringing up the shadows too much. So I'll first show you this image. I've got a few images to show you here and work with. This is obviously already, well, maybe it's not obvious, but this is already completely edited. This file is done. I'm ready to send this off to printer, web, social, whatever. But I just wanted to talk about kind of how I left it dark. Honestly, the shadows might even be a little bit too bright in this one. But one thing that I see all the time is photographers that want to maximize the dynamic range. You'll even notice I have some blown out spot over here. That doesn't need to be blown out. I can bring that back in. This wasn't blown out in the original raw file. So the big mistake a lot of people make, they will do something like that. Do you have more details in your scene? Yes, more details is not always better. First off, it doesn't look realistic because why would this foreground rock is nearly as bright as the sky? That doesn't make sense. The sky should be the brightest part in the image. Secondly, even if you're going to keep those highlights bright, it doesn't make sense to bring up those shadows and bring back these details because there's nothing interesting in the scene and it doesn't look realistic. So what this is actually doing is now I have a lot more detail that I can see down here in these rocks, and that's actually distracting to the scene. I'm better off with less shadows. And honestly, I could even slide this down a little bit more. I don't want to go too far and lose the details, but I don't want to bring it up too much. Now, one thing, if you have really dark shadows in your image, rather than bringing the shadows up, I like to just bring this blacks point up on the tone curve because it doesn't, it does brighten the shadows, but it doesn't, it's really hard to explain what it does, but it doesn't increase them like the shadows would. It basically just increases the blacks point, which, if you do too much, it gets washed out. I can hardly talk. But I like to do, output about 8 or so. Now you can see that just brings up it allows you to see some of the details in there, but it doesn't add any importance to it. So it's really important to leave those shadows dark, leave the skies bright. I know you have all that dynamic range. I just want to get enough detail that I can see what's going on here, but don't fall into the trap of just because you have the dynamic range, you feeling like you have to use it. We'll look at another image here. This one, same thing. You can see, honestly, the shadows might be too bright already in this one as well. You could bring those down a little bit to somewhere that's more realistic. You have dark foreground, bright sky. That's just how I want it to be. One tool that you can use to check this, because it's really hard for me to tell you, and I know a lot of people like having something a little more concrete that they can use, is to actually hit this button down here, go to tone curve and hit this button. If you don't have, you should have this button no matter which tone curve option you're on. Hit this button here. Then you can scroll over your image. Now look on the bottom right. I can't move my mouse over there as I scroll on the image, but down here on the bottom right, see that little moving circle on that line? That tells me the brightness of the pixel that I'm hovering over. So generally what I'm looking for is I want my shadows to lie somewhere between this first box and then the 25% mark. And I want my highlights to be maybe just under the 75% mark to maybe the 90% mark. So shadows in my image, you can see as I drag around, look at that. Most of my shadows here in the brights are right in between 80 and 90%, which is perfect. I want to keep those nice and bright. Now I go over my shadows and they are right between, 10. And as I go over here, we're getting up to 25, 30%. That is pretty good to me. Now you'll notice if you go in here and you punch the shadows up and drop the highlights down and you try and make your image have super HDR dynamic range. Now you'll notice when I do this, look at my highlights. They're in the 55% area, 55 to 75. Now my shadows are a little bit too bright as well. You can see some of these are approaching that 30 to 40% range on there. So that's something I want to avoid, and something that I'm always looking at is, making sure that my shadows are dark, my highlights are bright. I don't want to overutilize and over HDR look my image. I like to try and keep things looking realistic, and the best way to do that is to keep the foregrounds dark and the skies bright. Now, mistake number 3 is the contrast lover. I know there's a lot of you out there, and that was definitely me a while back. It took me a while to beat it out of myself to not love that contrast slider too much. If you've been following my channel for long, you will know I'm not a fan of using the contrast slider at all. I use the tone curve, but no matter how you apply contrast, you don't want to apply too much. I'll show you some examples here. Let's go ahead and look at this image. Now, this image is already very, very high contrast. It's already edited. And I'm really happy with where it's at because it kind of feels soft and glowy. And you can see I still have details in the trees, but they are dark. That's perfect. Now, a lot of people would make the mistake of, and I see this all the time, you reef on the contrast slider, and most photographers would say, okay, that's too much. I need to bring back the shadows, and I need to drop the highlights. Now, the image is just way over contrasted now. It's harder to look at. And so you really want to avoid adjusting that too much. Like I said, first of all, I would use the tone curve instead of the contrast slider to add contrast if I was you, but that's a song for another time. I can link a video you can check out if you're interested in learning how I do that. But you want to avoid what this does, essentially, it adds color to the image. So a lot of people make the mistake. They're like, oh, I want more color in my image. And they're like, wow, look, I didn't even add any vibrance or saturation. And look how vibrant it is. It's because you added contrast. If you add contrast, that adds color into your image as well. So you want to avoid that. I don't have a handy little tool to say how much is too much, other than if you're asking yourself if this is too much contrast, it probably is. Same thing on this image, nice little sunset. I've already added a little bit of contrast down here with a tone curve. Let's say I wanted to add more. You're like, wow, look how good that sunset is. You crush those blacks there. And then you're like, well, I'll just bring up the shadows and the darks. And, you know, it just gets to be too much. So you want to avoid doing that. This image is in a very workable spot right now. If I wanted to add a little bit more contrast, I could just drop this down. One of the reasons why I like the tone curve so much more is because rather than the contrast slider where it is what it is, with the tone curve, if I wanted to just pop the brightest spots, I could. Or if I wanted to drop the darks more, I could do that as well. It gives me a lot of control over the contrast. So don't add too much contrast. Not much else to this mistake other than just don't add too much contrast. I know that's hard to describe or see in your own images, but like I said, if you're asking yourself if there's too much contrast, there probably is. Okay, number 4 is something that I think all landscape photographers, or most landscape photographers, do as they improve their craft. They learn some good skills and then they try and make their images something that they're not. They try and do crazy edits to make crazy things happen. There is people that can pull off these crazy edits and make it look realistic, but if you are not a seasoned professional, you are not going to be able to pull off those realistic looking images, and it's going to make all of your images, your whole portfolio is going to look unrealistic. If you have a couple bad images that are really poorly edited, it drags down the whole portfolio. Let me show you what I mean. I'll show you this image that I edited. This was quite some time ago, 2017. I probably edited it the night of. And you can see there's just so much wrong with it. It's hard to look at. The colors are too much. This doesn't look realistic. This, you know, if the clouds were this orange, I should probably run because there's a problem. So I want to show you just briefly how I would maybe go through that. I can't fix this because it's a TIFF, but I have the raw file. Raw file is right here. And you can see, you know, there's not that much color to begin with. But if I was just going to edit this through, adjust the exposure, drop the highlights, increase the shadows, increase the whites and the blacks. Now you could go in and grab vibrance and saturation, use my tone curve, create a little S curve there, and just do my usual tone curve adjustment. Make that a little darker. Something just like that. I could even just throw on a really basic little vignette if I want. Something nice and soft, protect the highlights, you know, just all these little minor adjustments. And that honestly might even be overcooked with how orange that is there. So tone that down a little bit. But, you know, you don't have to do anything crazy here. You don't have to go for these crazy colors. Don't try and make your image something that it's not. Are these conditions good? Yes. Are they great? No. But do I want to stand here or sit here and try and make this some crazy edit? Like I said, some people can do it. There's a lot of tricks and stuff like that. But for the most part, if you're new, if you're watching this video, you're probably not at the point where you're going to be able to do anything crazy. And it's something that as I've continued to improve my photography, a lot of the ways that I've improved it is by simplifying my workflow and doing less. Most of my photos that I edit now, I can edit in 10 to 15 minutes tops. I used to spend, like on a photo like this, I would maybe spend 2 hours editing this. And the more stuff you add, the more overcooked it gets. It's really easy to overcook it. So you don't want to do too much. That's really the biggest thing. Don't try and make your photo something that it's not. All right, mistake number 5. I know a lot of people are hit and miss on this. I personally am a huge fan of vignettes. I think they add a lot to the image. They can help you to shape the light. But unfortunately, I see a lot of people applying really poor vignettes. So if you're someone that's not a vignette fan, you should definitely check this out, because maybe I'll help you to become a bigger fan of vignetting. And if you are someone that vignettes, I want to make sure you're not doing it the wrong way. That's really hurting your images. So let me show you what I mean. Got this image that I shot last fall. This really nice moose was standing in the light. It was really cool. Now I want you to look at the difference between, so this is the like kind of the raw image before. Basically, I took this image, edited it, threw it into Photoshop, and this was what I finished. Now, what I want you to notice, so this image has a vignette on it. Look at the darkness of the foreground. One thing that you will notice, a lot of people make the mistake of using the vignette slider. That's like the worst thing you can do to your image. Well, not the worst, but it's pretty bad to use the vignette slider on your image, and I will show you why. So I darken this like that. Even if I can try and protect the highlights, but it's still going to be kind of gunky there. Most people don't even protect the highlights though. So I feather this out. Now the problem that I have is this vignette looks decent on the bottom, but it looks terrible on the top. Why would I want to darken the brighter spot? That's where all of the sunlight is coming from, is up here. The sun is like somewhere, back over here. So why would I want to darken this corner where the sunlight's coming from? That does not make any sense. And it would be the same thing like in this image here. Notice same thing on the vignette. I didn't darken the sky at all, but I've darkened the foreground quite a bit. This foreground is a lot darker here in this finished image than this image here. Now, I will show you how to do that. There's a couple different ways, and I will show you, actually, I'm going to show you on this image here, it's unedited, how I would apply this vignette. Now, on this one, same concept. The light is coming from over here, and so I want to darken, kind of like this. I want to make this like, imagine a backwards L here. I want to do more darkening there than I want to on this top left corner. So I'll show you how I apply a vignette. I have an action in Photoshop and a video that is the absolute best way to do it in Photoshop, the most customizable. But if you are a Lightroom user, this is a fine way to do it as well. This works pretty well. It's something that I do in Lightroom all the time. But if you need a more advanced one, you'd want to go into Photoshop and use my little action for creating it there. But I'll show you how to do this here in Lightroom. So what you want to do, go to your masking tool, grab a radial gradient, and then you are just going to draw a big circle like that. I usually like to bring the feather down to maybe 50 or so, 50, 60. Make this a little bit smaller here. And let's zoom out just a little bit so we can see it. Now, this is inverted. We want this mask to be the opposite because we want to darken the edges. So this would be your like standard vignette where everything on the edges is getting darkened. So we'll darken that down. And the problem you will see now, same thing, we're darkening on this left side. We don't want to do that. Additionally, maybe the feather, let's decrease the feather to like 35. So, oops, I don't want to adjust that. Now, what you can do with this is you can move it around. So you are darkening one area less than the other. So what I might do on this image is make my circle a little larger, drop the exposure so you can see it a little bit more. Now I'm going to drag it to the upper left, and we want to feather this a little bit more, somewhere about in there. Now, what this is doing is it's off-centering the vignette. So when I toggle this, you can see the left side is still getting hit. There we go. Now it should be. Now our left side's not getting hit nearly as much. So you can see I'm darkening that right side a lot more, which looks more realistic because I'm not darkening where the light is coming from. Additionally, you can combine this if you know how to combine masks. You could do something like subtract and do linear gradient if you wanted to make sure it's not hitting this light at all. Something like that. Now you can see this is the mask we've created. So anything that's white is going to be getting darkened. Anything that's gray is going to be getting partially darkened. Anything that's black is not. Now you can see we're just darkening the side. So a much better way to make a vignette, totally custom. It took me a couple minutes to explain, but that should only take you maybe 1 minute or so to create once you have some practice. Really important to do your vignettes that way because every image is totally customizable and totally different. On this image, you can see I darkened the bottom like this. I didn't do any darkening to the sides or the top. You could do that with a linear gradient. And then this image, I want to darken like this again, same thing, kind of that backwards L shape. So it's really important. Every image requires a different vignette if you want it to look good. So make sure you're using a custom vignette. Biggest tip that I can give you when it comes to finishing your edits and applying that really finishing touch to each photo. All right, so that was a lot. Hopefully it wasn't too fast. Hopefully it was helpful for you, and hopefully there was some things that you can improve on your own images in here. I know this video would have helped me so much, 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was first getting started by just improving a lot of these mistakes that I see a lot of people making. Again, the opinion that it's a mistake is just my opinion. You can totally disagree. I just think that if you want to create more realistic looking images, avoiding these things is going to help you a lot. If you have any questions about anything that I mentioned, if you have any disagreements, any comments, any I think you're right, anything like that, let me know down below. I love to hear from you guys in the comments. I get back and respond to everybody if I can. But otherwise, I want to thank you guys so much for being here. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you want to improve your photography. I'm giving you weekly videos, weekly long form videos, and a short video every other day right now to help you guys improve your outdoor photography. I really want to help you, and I'm really honored that you'd be here. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Austin James Jackson. We'll see you guys next time.